Let's start by generating altruistic motivation by generating the minds of confidence, faith, refuge, and bodhicitta. Understanding that the Buddha, his only goal was to share his own direct experience in generating the insights that transform ordinary mind into enlightened mind, so that all sentient beings could replicate what he accomplished and similarly free themselves from suffering, attain a state of perfect happiness. That was his only goal in presenting the path to awakening, a path that was condensed by great masters who established the Lamrim tradition, masters like Lama Atisha, Lama Tsongkhapa, that lineage passing down to the present day, being condensed and explained also here by Lama Zopa Rinpoche and Lama Yeshe. All of these great masters doing so for our benefit, so that we can become Buddhas ourselves. And the only purpose of becoming a Buddha is to benefit sentient beings. So thinking along those lines, we cultivate faith and refuge and bodhicitta. All right, so we are kind of on the section, and my thought is to go through what's generally called the 4-point analysis that we've kind of been looking at. I'm just going to go through them all together. It could be that some of those pieces are maybe a little bit later also, but it makes sense to just kind of go through them, to go through the 4-point analysis in its entirety in a way, in an abbreviated form. And then if we come across parts of that, then we just won't spend as much time, but later in the contemplations. But that's kind of what we have begun with day 349, which was, again, if the real, and again, that was the kind of sticking point where it says real I, the I that we as ordinary sentient beings take to be what we think of as real, what we think of as self-existent, concrete, existing from its own side, which is in fact the false I, but we don't perceive it that way, is I think what Lama Zopa's point is. Day 349 said that it would have to be one with the aggregates or separate from them, and we presented that in a little bit more nuanced way by coming up with these 4 baskets of places where when we, as I said, when we try to become curious about the experience that we all know that we all know that, and we talked about how to clearly identify this false I, which is to recollect being embarrassed, being righteously indignant, or being afraid in some way. Those are all circumstances when this thing that, you, of course, um, the example years ago that I heard, kind of the analogy that, or the example that was given of a very subtle uh, way in which, this false I, because the false I is always there, but when I was in teachings on this point before, the teacher said, well, even when we're just kind of looking for a snack, in the fridge, the false I is there. But we don't use that as a memory. We don't think, oh, well, yesterday I got a little bit peckish and I went to the fridge and I was, that's not in meditation. That's not as helpful as thinking about a time when we were righteously indignant, when we were embarrassed, or when we were afraid, because the false I is so strong in those times, those experiences, that it gives us a very clear picture of what the object of refutation is. So that step, we know that step one is clearly identifying that which we are refuting, that which does not exist. Because as we've said, the mere I is no problem. The mere I is not what jealousy attaches to, deluded pride attaches to, hatred doesn't arise from the mere I. It's the concretized I, the really, really the I that we cling to as the real me. What, this is me. How dare this happen to me? I can't believe this is happening to me. That solid rock, that feels like it is what can be embarrassed, what can be harmed, what can be, afraid. That's the exaggerated version of the I that we are refuting. So now we get curious. We're like, well, we all know that we have those experiences daily, in some form or another, where, you know, in small ways and big ways, all day, every day, we're having experiences of the false I. So then, as a kind of scientist, we're like, well, I wonder why. I wonder, what that's all about. How, what's the origin of that? If it makes sense, if it's reasonable, if, then I should be able to tell somebody, here's the origin of this experience. This is the cause of it. This is what is giving rise to it. So when we try to do that, we look for it, as we've said, in one of four locations. So we've said, in day 349, it was presented as we said, in a slightly more simplified form, as one with the aggregates are separate from them. And so, I mean, I guess what it could mean when it says, it could be a condensed rather than simplified, because it says one with the aggregates, right? And if you just sort of explode that in a more detailed way, then when you're talking about the aggregates, there are three ways in which you could talk about the aggregates. You could talk about the body alone, the mind alone, or the body and the mind together. And all three of those are still like the aggregates, talking about the aggregates. So then in day 350, none of the aggregates separately is the I, nor are all of the aggregates as a whole. None of the aggregates separately is the I, nor all of the aggregates as a whole. So that means the aggregates separately would be either the body or the mind. So basically, this is where we could start. We could say, okay, I am curious about my own experience of this really solid ego identity that is coming up all the time. So is it Is it one with the body? Is it one with the mind? Or is it one with the body and the mind? So then we would so then in the commentary it says, despite the fact that the label, quote, I refers in some way to the body and mind, there is no part of our physical or mental makeup that we can point to and say, this is I. Neither our hand, our heart, or any other part of our body is our I. Nor can we say that what we are thinking or feeling at this or that moment is our I. To identify ourselves with our body or mind, yet continue to think this is my body or this is my mind, is to make nonsense out of everything. These thoughts would imply, quote, this is my body's body, or this is my mind's mind, both of which are meaningless statements, Lama Zopa says. So we can unpack this in a couple of different ways. Basically, the goal is to kind of point out the logical fallacies that are involved in thinking in this way. So if we were to say that our I is one with the body, then, to start there in this meditative investigation, then we would have to say, well, but the body isn't one thing. The body is a collection. The body is a collection of many things. And there are none of those many things that are the seat, are the origin of the I, because if that was true, then losing that one thing would fundamentally mean that now we're a different person, and we would think of ourselves as a different person, and that isn't an experience that anybody really has. There are many people in the world who lose a hand or an arm or a leg or both arms or both legs, or they have a liver transplant or a heart transplant or a lung transplant. People get, their stomach stapled and changed drastically. People get plastic surgery or reconstructive surgery. And all of these people relate to that experience as something that happened to them. They would say, yes, I lost my arm when this happened in this car accident. I got cancer, and so I had to get a liver transplant. And now I don't have, now I'm healed from my cancer because I have a new liver. So there's no, now certainly, of course, the body can, things can happen to the body that result in death, and then the body and mind separate. But there's no change, and people gain hundreds of pounds and people lose hundreds of pounds, and they say, I gained 300 pounds, I lost 300 pounds. So nothing can happen to the physical body that changes in a way where it changes the ego identity, where a person now calls themselves a different name. And I mean, even even in really drastic situations where people might undergo sex reassignment or something, and they might, yes, they might change their name from a male sounding name to a female sounding name, or a female sounding name, but still they they have their own history of memories. They would say, oh, when I was a child this happened to me. They would say, I decided to undergo sex reassignment surgery because I felt like that would, I would be more comfortable if other people related to me in a different way, which is really the same as, like, I decided to lose weight because I wanted to be healthier. I wanted to lose weight in order to be more, and people, I mean, some people lose a little bit of weight just to be more attractive. Some people lose a lot of weight because it's healthier, but they think, I intentionally did that for this purpose. I had a goal. I engaged in a course of action because I wanted to achieve that goal. So the ego identity is the same. is continuous throughout all of those processes, even when really, really drastic things happen. So that's one way of pointing out logical fallacies about trying to think of the ego identity as being one with the body. Another way of thinking is that there are many times when we're engaging in a purely mental action, like daydreaming or planning or remembering, things that are purely mental events. And we label those as something that I'm doing. We think, oh, I'm thinking about what I would like to have for dinner tonight. I'm thinking about, what's going to happen tomorrow or how to plan for this upcoming event. Um, and if the I was one with the body, we couldn't ever say that anything that was occurring in the mind alone is also happening to I, because the I is one with the body. It's synonymous with the body. It's identical to the body. So that's another, you could say, well, you've already dispensed with it by talking about all of the parts of the body and how, the body. But if you need to go into even more detail and to have even more evidence for why we can't say that the I is identical with the body, again, you start with that there's no individual, that the body is not monolithic. The body is a compilation, and none of the individual parts are essential for our ego identity. They're all changeable, they're all replaceable, even just with the aging process. We started out, we have the same body that we had on the day that we were born, and now it's the same body, but it's just changed, and it's continuing to change. And yet the I is labeled on all of those moments. We feel like I was a baby. I went to see Santa Claus when I was 5 years old, and I have a memory of sitting on Santa Claus's lap. And, I have a really traumatic memory of like feeling this bored, that he wasn't even like actually overweight. He had this like, he put a board in his suit to like make, and I felt it, and I was like, this can't be Santa Claus because he's not overweight. Like it was very upsetting. um I was like 9. It was terrible. So, but we think I did all of those things. I went on vacation. I did, even though I was 7 or 12 or 14 or whatever it is, this continuity of ego identity is just merely labeled this changing, even just through normal life, even just through nothing drastic, nothing, none of the earlier really drastic examples, just the continuity of life. The I is imputed on all of those moments, even though even though we know when I was 5 and when I'm 40, 45, very, very different in terms of everything that we know, everything that we can do, etc. And then also, so all of that is refuting this idea. And then also, we know that there are many times when we ascribe something purely mental as also happening to or being done by this quote unquote I. And that would be impossible if let's assume that we say, well, I am going to label, maybe the body as a whole, not its individual parts, but like this whole collection of the body. That's the I. But then, one fallacy with that, again, so again, there's many, many reasons, and we need to have many, many reasons that we can bring up because the false I is so strong, because it's such an ingrained habit that we have. We need to try to come at it from many, many different examples, to leave, giving this example of searching for our keys in the room that we're certain. If we don't really search thoroughly, then we're always going to think, well, maybe it's there, because I didn't actually, do a really, really thorough search. So that's what we really have to do. We have to leave no stone unturned so that we have complete certainty that this appearance of the false I is not valid. And we can only get there by being really diligent and really thorough. So, we could also say, again, so even if we were to say that somehow, so if we do say that the body as a whole is the I, again, one problem is that we've refuted, we know, we can't deny that the body is a compilation of many things, and we've refuted that any single one of those is the I. So the body then is a compilation of only things, none of which are the I. And to say that when you assemble a whole bunch of things that are non-I, now suddenly you have I, that is a logical fallacy. Um, Similarly, you could apply that to like a car. When you're doing this, in a similar way, you can be like, well, of course, I agree that the steering wheel isn't the car, the front left tire isn't the car. You go through all of the thousands of parts, and you would agree that none of them individually are the car. But then you would say, oh, but when I put them all together in the right order, now I have a car. And you can see how that's just irrational to say that if something is entirely made of non-car and then you put it together, you assemble it, now magically there is car, you can see how you're doing some sort of additional mental labeling that isn't really actually occurring in the object, how you're just putting a label on top of something that you've established is 100% non-car. And the body, we know, if we think about my right eye, my left eye, my tongue, my spleen, my, this finger, that finger, we go through the body in that way, we're left with hundreds of parts that are non-I, and we assemble them, magically, we're not going to get I. So there's many, many reasons. And then really it's just kind of the reverse when we're talking about the mind. It's the same sort of analysis. The mind, like the body, is composed of parts, in the sense that there are thoughts, there are feelings, there are memories, there's the rational part, there's emotions, there's all kinds of different parts to the mind. There's attention, there's inattention, there's all kinds of factors. And we can't say, well, my anger, is my anger me? Am I only me when I'm angry? Is my compassion me? Am I only me when I'm compassionate? Is my love me, but not my anger? Is my jealousy me, but not my compassion, but not my anger, but not my, is my rational self the me, the I, but not my emotional self, not my impulsive self, not, and no, we come to the same way of thinking, that the mind has many different parts, just like the body has many different parts, and no individual part of the mind is the I. So the mind as a whole is similarly composed of entirely not I, and not non-I things are what make up the collection that we call the mind. Um, and again, if you assemble a whole bunch of things that are not the I, you don't get an I. You don't magically now have a real, intrinsically existent I. And also, the reverse is true in the sense that we do purely physical things. Um, we would say, my knee is hurting. That's purely happening in the body. And so, has nothing to do with the mind. Mind is observing that the body is in pain, but the mind isn't creating the cut on your, the what's happening is purely occurring in the body. The mind is observing it, sure, but it's not happening to, whereas if you are, grieving someone who died, that's not happening in the body, it's happening only in the mind. The mind is observing the grief, but it's a purely mental event. Um, so, but my, it's meaningless to say, my body, and because it's like saying my body's body or my mind's mind, if the I, because we think of I as both as owner of body and mind. um, this is kind of how you would, if you were to think, I could be one with the body, I could be one with the mind. And so then you've analyzed those both separately, and then you're left with, okay, well, there is, both body and mind are the sum total of all of the aggregates. So maybe that is the I. Maybe that's why, because the body and the mind are connected, maybe that's the origin of the I. But you've just looked at all of the parts of the body and you've looked at all of the parts of the mind, and you agree, you've come to see directly in your own experience that both of those aggregates are nothing but a compilation of things that are not I. And so now all you're doing is assembling more things, all of which are non-I, and you're saying, well, but now I have an I. And you still don't. It's still just as illogical, um, because if there is no individual part of the body or individual part of the mind that is I, putting all of that together doesn't add up to now having an I. Um, so pause for questions.
It seems as though when one is doing an analytical meditation, that these different ideas and components of the theory of that are fairly straightforward to analyze. And there are times when, just in the course of a day, say, you are able to stop and recognize those moments where you see, you can describe this in terms of, oh, I just recognize myself or my mind being emotional, or I've stubbed my toe, or those things, and that that I arises. But it's, I mean, for me anyway, it's never happened that the that I has completely disappeared. And I'm just wondering if that only happens when you have a direct, non-conceptual state of emptiness.
Yeah, I'm not sure, because I mean, a correct. It could depend partially on fully qualified calm abiding, or how close a person is to fully qualified calm abiding. A correct inferential understanding is also quite powerful, as compared to, but um, yeah, and in your example, you're talking about, daily life. You're talking about, actually being out of meditative equipoise on emptiness. So, and really, even so, there are two kind of issues. One is, what are the factors that are necessary for anyone to ever cause the false I to completely be subdued, completely subside. And I'm not in. I think it. I think it could be you have to have fully qualified calm abiding, and perhaps, as you're saying, a direct non-conceptual realization of emptiness. That might be possible. That might be required. Um, but even when you have those things, even for those people, they are not causing the I to completely disappear in normal waking life. They're able to do it, but only when they are actually in meditative equipoise on emptiness. Once they arise from that state and they're going about their business, it's different, things are very, compared to us, things are very different for them. They're not grasping in the same, with the same level of intensity. They understand that the experiences that they're having are, you know more so, illusion like than anything else. But still there are traces of that, and so there's still the appearance of concrete existence. And um, only it's said that only a Buddha in an actual, you know, life can perceive, can directly perceive um, reality and its emptiness simultaneously. Um, so, the world of appearance and the world of ultimate reality um, only can be apprehended in that way for a Buddha. Even those who are progressing on the path of seeing and beyond, still, inherent existence is appearing to them, and they're not assenting to it in the same strong way that we're assenting to it, but um, they haven't completely abandoned um, any kind of trace of that inherent existence. So, but yeah, so they arise out of meditative equipoise, and the world of appearance kind of rushes back in, and it's a different experience that they're then having. Um, and that's, yeah, as I said, that's after they've had this direct experience with fully qualified calm abiding, which is why they have to repeat it over and over and over again and progress through the paths, the Bodhi, the path of seeing, and so on, and progressing all the way up to the path of no more learning, and continuing to create, to purify negativities and create merit and do all of these things to get rid of the last kind of stains of inherent existence. So we've looked at the body, the mind, and the combination of body and mind. The one that's kind of easiest to dispense with is what's described in day 351, separate from the aggregates. If the Lama Zopa says, if the I existed separately from the aggregates, there'd be no base for anything to happen. So this would be the idea. This is, in a way, kind of the idea of like a soul, in a way, like some kind of um, something that exists, but it doesn't. It's like it's not a functioning thing in our life. It's not the mind that we're using. It's not the body. It's just kind of this. It's like a separate. It's something. It's the idea that there's something separate, something that isn't body or isn't mind, that is the real I, that I don't have access to, or I can't perceive, or I can't. It's not like directing my actions, but it's sort of dormant in the background, um, and but it's there, and that's responsible for why I have this ego identity. And if that were true, Buddhism basically says, if that were true, then we would be able um, to have experiences that didn't depend on a mental or physical action, that we could there would be times when because we don't experience the ego identity as kind of a non-functioning thing, we don't experience it, we experience it very much like impacting our body and our mind, and driving decisions and causing actions. And so there would have to be times when this ego identity was experiencing something um, that had nothing to do with a physical or mental action. Like we could validly say, while I'm at home, I'm also at the store. Or when we're writing a letter, we could say, I'm playing tennis. Um, and no one ever has that experience. No, that we would have to ascribe some kinds of events, activities, experiences to an I that is not that is engaging in something when neither the body nor the mind is engaging in that experience. But all of our experiences are traceable. In fact, in our actual experience, everything that we do experience is traceable to a mental or physical event. We can say we that accounts for every single one of the experiences that we have ever had. It's either been occurring in the mind or in the body, or some combination of body and mind. Never have we had the experience that body and mind were doing one thing, and we would say that I am doing a third thing that neither body nor mind is participating in. So it's kind of the easiest one, because if we just sort of think about it, we can say, well, it must be true that if I'm suggesting that the I is separate from body and mind, that there would be experiences happening to me, to the I, that when that were simultaneous with and completely different from events that the body and the mind were actually participating in. And we can't point to anything like that. So we can, just it's really the easiest one to dispense with, because we can just see in our own direct experience that's never happened. And so if it's never happened, and all of the experiences that we have had have only been experiences of body and mind, then this idea that it could be separate from body and mind is just nonsense, just is silly.
This might be a very coarse way to ask the question, but it's what arose in my mind. Um, if ego is kind of driving the bus, and we are attempting to, I guess, refute that, then who's driving the bus?
Yeah, there's no, it's so the mind exists and the body exists. Those are both existent phenomena, and they're both interrelated and interdependent. So, they are mutually influencing one another. When we're sick, the mind feels a certain way, the cognition and perception and so on is influenced. When we're very healthy, when we're very vital, and then we're eating well, we're sleeping well, our mind, maybe our mood is more elevated, we're, the birds are chirping and we're just kind of, so certainly it's an incredibly complex interrelated system of body and mind. um, and there isn't anything else. There are processes occurring in the mind, there are processes occurring in the body. The mind does have some emotionality, some rationality, some planning ability, some memory ability, some capacity for love and compassion and generosity and patience, and some capacity for cruelty and animus. And all of these are all true, valid things that are all happening. And what isn't true is that there is an owner of both body and mind. It's not necessary to say that there is something which is in control of both the body and the mind, and is distinct, is its own essential kind of solid thing. There are processes unfolding in the body, there are processes unfolding in the mind, and they are kind of talking to each other and being influenced back and forth. And that's all that there is.
So, what is the role of the ego other than for us to get rid of it? Because it seems to get in the way of our progress and our motivation to move beyond it.
Yeah, I don't think that Buddhism would have a specific explanation for why it is that every single sentient being in every single moment of ordinary existence perceives of themselves as existing in an overly exaggerated, concretized way. Buddhism just notices that that's true. I don't think that they try to explain the cause of that. I mean, of course, the cause of that is fundamental ignorance, but fundamental ignorance is just a lack of is a in one way is a lack of understanding about emptiness, and due to the lack of understanding of emptiness, when we perceive, we actively misperceive um, things to have, but there isn't a reason why. It's just, if you don't, I mean, you could postulate a universe or a reality in which every sentient being somehow intuitively understands emptiness, um, but it isn't that way. It seems to be that intuitively understanding emptiness is not as easy, is not is unintuitive in a way. It's not the path of least resistance. It's not the sort of shortcut, the sort of cognitive shortcut that um, every single sentient being uses as its default. Um, it just isn't, it's just it's because it's kind of, it is sort of overwhelming to take in all of that sensory information and all of those, because when you reach for something, you can pick it up, you can put, if it's edible, you can, and then you are less hungry when that happens. And so this kind of cause and effect, you can think about going from point A to point B, and then you really can go there. So you do have this agency, in the world as a sentient being, and things, um, and so to recognize that, you know, that all of those things, including, and there's of course a very strong drive for existence, for, the continuity of, we fight against death, we fight against threats. There's a very primal kind of drive for preservation, that's built into form. Um, and then that leaves imprints in the mind, all of those drives, all of those processes, that leaves imprints in the mind that instruct the mind, that train the mind to view things in accordance with all of those imprints. Um, but yeah, Buddhism basically just says this is the default of sentient beings. This is the baseline state. Because the universe is not conspiring to bring us to enlightenment. That's certainly true. It's possible, but there's no reason to think that, the universe wasn't intrinsically designed. It wasn't intrinsically, it's not intrinsically benevolent. It's not, there are enlightened beings. There are perhaps uncountable, enlightened beings. I don't know, there may be a number beyond comprehension, and those enlightened beings do want to benefit. So there are benevolent forces in the universe, you could say, but no one set the universe in motion benevolently, intelligently. There simply were minds. There simply were consciousnesses, and Buddhism doesn't try to explain why consciousnesses happened to be existent phenomena, just that there are, and their baseline state is one of fundamental ignorance, and that baseline state is one, as you're saying, that actively is an obstacle to becoming enlightened. Um, so yeah, we're kind of all on our own, and it's kind of not great, um, but it is doable. There are methods. It is understood. It is doable. And as you're saying, intellectually, it's not even really that complicated. It's just getting to that direct non-conceptual point. It getting to the point where that logic and that insight becomes so powerful that it can overcome that baseline state that we currently have. Getting to that point is what's quite, you know, a challenge. Creating that depth of that familiarity.
It also occurs to me that particularly in this age where we're inundated with so much of everything, and that vigilance, and I know that sounds kind of heavy, but that seems to me anyway that there's a certain for myself and my own spiritual progression to maintain kind of a watchfulness almost, in order to continue to point that out to myself, to continue to remind myself of reality, I guess.
Yeah, so I mean, kind of in so day 352 and day 353, is kind of getting at the more general point of, as you're saying, how do we go about reminding ourselves? And he says, talking about this idea of like our baseline state, he talks about that we're kind of tricked or hypnotized into, again, because you're saying it's so, there's so many different things, and we can't maintaining like, oh, this is empty, this is, just in a given room there's 100 different objects that we're cognizing simultaneously. And so, as I was kind of saying, short is just to be like, well, yeah, they're all out there and I'm just seeing them, and because it does kind of overwhelm the mind to think about all of that. So he says we're kind of hypnotized into that. We're kind of like an audience that's come under the spell, of this false way of seeing things. But he says, we can understand how that trick is done. We can, through wisdom, through logic, through wisdom, we can see what goes into that, which is that we, we layer on top of all of this. We're not content with just, recognizing that, this this is a functioning thing that's in front of me, and it has this quality and that quality, but it also has, causes and conditions. It's a dependent arising. It does exist, but it doesn't exist in that concretized way. It does exist as a dependent arising, meaning that it has its own unique, history of it. Well, it used to be, you know had, this element and this element, they came together, and but then also that element and that element, well, they came from a star that exploded, and then that star, well, that came from gas, and so on, that dust and gas, and that collected over time. And then we can trace that all the way back to the Big Bang, and then say, well, where did the Big Bang came from? There was a previous moment that gave rise, and where did that previous moment came from? Well, came from some other previous moment. And so everything is really just um, particular configurations, particular instances of unique causes and conditions um, that are assembled, put together momentarily in a particular way. Because in the future, this thing that I'm interacting with, well, it'll be different. It will cease to perform that function, and that, and then nobody will regard it as that thing. Um, and there's examples of maybe artifacts from 7, 10, 12,000 years ago, um, when the people at that time, they might have regarded it in a particular way, and now when we're looking at it, we have no idea that they regarded it, and then we make up our own stories about what it was used for, how they thought about it, and we're just guessing. Like, maybe we kind of know, but there's no written language. There's no we're just sort of making up a guess as to what it meant in that culture, what they used it for, like the little baubles and things that the Vikings were buried with. And we don't really know what significance they had. And, um, because culture has changed over that time. Um, so it's just a momentary coming together of the causes and the conditions, the parts, and then also that mental imputation, that active mental labeling. At the time, 15,000 years ago, there was a particular mental imputation based on a particular cultural understanding. 15,000 years later, same object, different mental imputation based on a different cultural understanding. And that's going to happen again in another 15,000 years with regard to some of the things that, when, if there's nuclear war, and then there's just a bunch of things, and then people, like, humanity reconstitutes, they're going to look at those ruins and make up their own stories about, well, oh, I think that this did that, and I think that, but again, they're just guessing. And that's not any more, you know, their understanding is just as real and just as valid conventionally as our understanding of it today. They're both just made up imputations of something that exists at a particular moment in time.
I think they're really going to scratch their heads over styrofoam peanuts.
So we'll end on day 353, where Lama Yeshe is kind of giving us some advice to about how to go about this analysis. He says that um, the quotation is, we should train our mind to see and feel reality gently, naturally, and skillfully. So this is kind of talking about how it might not be so gentle or skillful to um, always go about that really formal analysis, like to kind of driving yourself crazy in your daily life, thinking about how this is empty and that's empty and so on. He says sometimes strenuous application of logic can often harm our understanding rather than help it. He says at such times it's a good idea to relax the force of our logical investigation and merely observe how the things we are examining functions. how it works, where it came from, and so on and so forth. He says, for instance, if we're examining something to discover if it is as existent as it appears, we can remember this was put together by people in a factory, then it was shipped to the market, then I came along and I bought it, and now I am using it. Looked at in this way, he says the non-self-existent nature of the things become a bit clearer. We can see it as something that grew out of causes, that depends on many things for its existence, that functions this way and that. This understanding will soften the general impression we have that it is something independent and concrete, existing out of the solid, self-contained object. He says this approach to understanding interdependence and non-self-existence is comfortable and direct. Once we're familiar with it, we will easily see why many great masters of the past have claimed that interdependence or dependent arising is the king of logical reasonings and the best way to understand the actual condition of things. So, he's saying rather than trying to have this really form, because again, we just looked at that the 4-point analysis, thinking, oh, I have to exhaustively look here. I have to exhaust, and that's certainly, that's true. But he's saying that can be a bit much. That can overwhelm. If I try to do that with everything, that really, really point by point, really exhaustive thing, over time, through familiarity, through making progress with calm abiding and so on, over time, maybe we get to a place where that reasoning, that logic is very comfortable and something that we can do. But in the meantime, maybe for right now, we might go a bit stir crazy trying to do that with everything all of the time. So he's saying this more relaxed way of just, again, just sort of being curious about things like, oh, this cup, like, what's it made of? Is it made of metal? Is it made of clay? Where did the clay come from? Where did the metal come from? Maybe not, like, we don't know what country, but we know, well, it was iron ore, or it was, it was in a pit somewhere and it was dug out of the ground and then it was processed in a certain way. It's like, oh, everything is like that. Everything is this sort of frozen, as I was saying before, this like frozen moment is what we are in relationship to, of all of these unique, but this frozen moment, is not really frozen, because each moment that we're interacting with it, it's changing, but that's, that subtle impermanence, which is a bit different. But, still, we're in relationship to something that is not, what it appears. It has its own, all of its, it has its own unique history. It has parts, and then it has, and then I, based on my culture, based on what I've learned or haven't learned, or what I like or don't like, what I find attractive or unattractive, or beautiful or ugly, or tasty or disgusting, these biases, these are all factoring into my experience of what I'm in relationship to. So still, I mean, we can go overboard on that too, I think, but it's a little bit more, he's saying it's a bit more intuitive. It's a bit more, it's not as formalistic as like trying to, you know, actually like cause the object of refutation to arise and then like search for it. We're just kind of thinking along those lines, and that softens how we relate to things. We have a bit of a more relaxed way of being in relation to things when we bring up that kind of way of thinking about them. All right, so we're out of time for today. Any thoughts or questions? All right, so we'll end with dedication. So we bring to mind our altruistic motivation, and that by having listened and participated, we've actualized that motivation, which has generated positive energy in the mind. That positive energy, when it ripens, will bring about a beneficial result. being a virtuous karma. So we want to offer that virtuous karma, that positive energy, for the benefit of all sentient beings without exception. So bring to mind clearly the specific ways in which you are offering the fruit of your practice, the ways in which you want that positive energy to ripen in a spiritually meaningful, beneficial, supportive way. All right. So we will, let me double check. Is something happening on Thursday? I have a feeling.
I can just check that schedule that morning.
Yeah.
Sure.
Just today is the. No, I think we're all set. Yep. Yeah, we're all set. Okay. So we will meet again on Thursday. Bye.